The video game industry likes to think that it's on an always upward path. With every new generation of consoles, more and more can be done with the medium, and every new game seems to be bigger and better than the last. While this is a very natural trajectory, I can't help but feel that with every giant step forward, we lose a little bit of what we already had. The bigger and better mantra of design flourished in the 8th generation of consoles. Whether it was a bold debut for a new IP or a larger-than-life revitalization of a beloved franchise, it seemed like every major AAA release of the past 7 years strived to be a grand 100 hours plus experience. And while we had some games succeed with flying colors in that regard, for what my money's worth, I feel like a lot of these games could hardly rise above mediocrity. The more complex a game strives to be, the greater room there is for everything to go wrong. For better or for worse, the phrase simple but effective seems to have all but vanished from the lexicon of AAA games development. We've seen this philosophy get picked up by the indie scene, which is fine, but it's hard not to yearn for the days that you could go into a store to buy games that seem simple on the surface, only to be surprised with a wealth of challenge and variety, along with the high levels of polish you'd expect from a AAA development cycle. Puzzle games have always seemed to have such a design philosophy down pat. For as many releases as there have been of Tetris within the past 30 years, very rarely do they stray away from the original formula. But each new title brings just enough new game modes or gimmicks to make it worth picking up instead of just hanging onto the Game Boy original for all of time. Tetris Attack is a game that has mastered the simple but effective mantra within the puzzle genre perfectly. It doesn't take more than a passing glance to realize that Tetris Attack is Tetris in name alone. There's no variety of different shaped pieces, blocks slowly move upward instead of falling, and rotation of blocks is abandoned entirely in favor of switching panels horizontally. It should be said that this isn't a bastardization of the Tetris formula, but rather just a simple retitling for an English conversion of a game called Panel de Pon. Panel de Pon is the Super Famicom original of Tetris Attack. Nintendo got the inkling that the very Japanese fantasy-inspired cast of little girl fairies would be lost on an international audience, so a cast based on Yoshi's Island was swapped in. Save for these changes and the addition of a Yoshi-inspired music track, Tetris Attack and Panel de Pon are one and the same. Tetris Attack at its most basic level is very simple, arguably more simple than the original Tetris itself. The rectangular playing field is slowly filled up with an upward rising grid of colored tiles, and players must swap these tiles around 2 at a time to form a vertical or horizontal line of 3 of the same, clearing it away. Let your screen fill up and it's game over. To say that it's possible to form lines greater than 3 would be an understatement. Through clever arranging, players can form line combos of 4, 5, 6, and beyond with careful organization to create more than one line at a time. In addition to line combos, players can create entire chains of successive lines. When a line is formed, the blocks gain a brief moment of sentience only to stare in horror as it's just as quickly ripped away from them. After this, any blocks that were sitting on top of that line will fall down. If you use the short period before gravity takes hold, you can set up several chains. The limit to how many chains a player can create is only capped by their own skill, or in some cases that day's supply of good luck. As far as basics, that's really all there is to be said about Tetris Attack's core game mechanics. At beginner level play, it's a relaxing brain teaser challenge to find a line of 3, but as your skill level increases, the game becomes a frantic test of observation and reflex. By creating such a simple and accessible game, the developers of Tetris Attack established a skill floor low enough for a toddler to crawl over, and a skill ceiling so high that it becomes seemingly impossible for human hands to even approach. Like many puzzle games, Tetris Attack really just has one input, switching blocks. There's a handful of 1 and 2 player game modes to complement Tetris Attack's simple design. Endless and timed mode are high score modes that are exactly what you'd expect them to be. Stage clear mode tasks players with clearing blocks until a boundary line appears, and puzzle mode completely flips the momentum of the game by challenging players to use their combo and chaining skills to clear all of the blocks, with a hard limit on how many switches you can make. This one never appealed to me too much, but it's cool that it's here. There are over 100 individual puzzles, so it's like an entire opposite side of the coin for Tetris Attack. These can get really challenging. I start to get stumped around stage 4. I'll be playing this in my senior years to ward off dementia. Puzzle mode feels like it could have been a game all of its own, which I think is saying something about how brilliant the simple nature of switching panels is and all the potential that comes with it. Lastly, there is the 2-player versus mode, which, given its attachment to a single-player story, I always gathered to be the truest way to play Tetris Attack. Versus mode is what you'd expect. 2 players play at once and try to outlast each other. Tetris Attack's gimmick, though, is its garbage block mechanic. When a player clears lines through combos and chains, they begin to build a queue of garbage blocks to send to the other player. Blocks that just take up space on the screen. These blocks can't even be cleared, only changed to regular blocks by forming lines adjacent to them. You can also attack your opponent with shock blocks, created by making lines with shock panels. These are just another form of the garbage block, the difference being that they don't group up with the ordinary garbage. Tetris Attack's inclusion of garbage blocks is another simple but effective addition to an already simple but effective puzzle game. It's not a particularly profound mechanic to add to a game, but it's a brilliant and powerful one all the same. It takes a relaxing and colorful puzzle game and turns it into an aggressive and offensive frenzy where both players strive to play at their are most optimal. This is further encouraged by the fact that the longer a combo and the greater a chain a player forms, the larger and more effective their garbage blocks become. Once again, this is a mechanic that carries a greater depth beyond first glance. Once a player does clear a screen full of garbage, the screen freezes as every tile is converted into a regular panel. This means that the defensive player has an opportunity to arrange the bottom of their playfield to immediately start building combos and chains of their own, sending a stream of garbage blocks right back. Tetris Attack is almost like a racquetball of the minds in that sense. There really aren't enough words to go around for the amount of praise that Tetris Attack's versus mode deserves. For years, this seemingly dismissible Super Nintendo puzzle game has kept me returning more than nearly anything else in my library. The core gameplay is an absolute blast, and the garbage block mechanic is a quick and brilliant sprinkle of depth that elevates the game into one of the finest two-player experiences of the 16-bit era, if not all of video game history. It's simply the most fun mode in the game to me, which is what I alluded to earlier by calling it the true mode. I feel like this is further backed by the giant garbage block and two-player game eye-catcher on the box art. Speaking of art, I feel like Tetris Attack's overall presentation has really helped it become so timeless. Super Nintendo visuals have always had the privilege of aging quite well under modern scrutiny, and Tetris Attack is no exception. The game's bright color palette, lovable Yoshi characters, and infectious music come together to make an already distinct puzzle game entirely unforgettable. Despite being a stand-in for Little Girl Fairies, the Mario Universe characters fit in perfectly with the original art and music assets of Panel de Pon. Each selectable character has their own respective background art and musical theme, so there's a proper reason to hop around from character to character and find a favorite. What's cool about Tetris Attack's soundtrack is that every song has an up-tempo, unnerving alteration that plays once your screen fills up past a certain point. This is like a light switch in your head. You perk up and look everywhere as you desperately scan for solutions. When you get even closer to failure, all the panels start to do this nervous little dance, and right before you lose, they all do the puzzle game block equivalent of clenching their butt cheeks before the loud thud once you lose. These little touches are the cherry on top of a game that already carried a vibrant sense of personality. The game could have just been a black background with no music and been just as fun, but choosing to set the game in the Mario universe with a fitting enough soundtrack really elevates Tetris Attack into a game that deserves to sit elbow to elbow with all the greats. Funnily enough, it's a very lack of that kind of iconic distinction that's caused Tetris Attack, or the Puzzle League series as it's known now, to fizzle out. There was a Pokemon-themed version on N64, which was every bit as good a game, but I feel like it's held back by a weaker presentation form factor compared to the SNES game. After that, Puzzle League games were relegated to handheld only, with no theming. And these games are perfectly fine and fun games to play on their own, but there's no refuting how much charm gets lost without that simple layer of familiarity. It's a shame, really. You can slap any property over this game and it's gonna do really well. In any case, I think that the games industry could do well to look back on and learn from games like Tetris Attack. You're probably not going to see a Tetris Attack Super HD version for $60 in store, because, frankly, a game like Tetris Attack isn't worth $60 with modern gaming sensibilities in mind. And truthfully, I don't think that's something to be faulted for. However, recent enough games like Puyo Puyo Tetris or even Super Bomberman R have proven that both publishers and consumers alike still have a taste for quick and simple, old-school inspired bite-sized gaming with AAA polish, even if that kind of game isn't the gold standard system seller that it used to be. Video games will always be judged for how much of their potential console hardware they're utilizing. That's just how our wonderful dumb industry works. And while games like Death Stranding or Red Dead Redemption 2 push technical boundaries and promise to consume dozens, if not hundreds of hours of your time, they never seem to capture that lifelong lasting appeal a game like Tetris Attack does.